Welcome back to Against the Fade. If you're a man in the back half of your life and you've noticed your body recovers slower, the mood runs shorter, and your drive just isn't what it used to be, this one's for you. My guest is Dr. Kirk Parsley. He earned his trident as a Navy SEAL, left the teams, and came back as their doctor. The man who kept the most elite operators on the planet running through years of continuous combat. What he found treating them is the thing that most of us get backwards. We sacrifice sleep first and reach for the fix last, when sleep is the foundation holding everything up. Our strength, our hormones, our marriages, our heads. So this is the honest conversation about sleep, testosterone, and recovery in midlife. Doc Parsley, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to start out with a little bit of background. So you, at age 19, went into the SEALs, correct?
I became a SEAL at 19. So yeah, I'd been in the military for about a year before that. So I joined the Navy at 17.
Okay.
And then a few months before my 18th birthday, and then went, by the time I left, I was 18. Yeah.
And then you served and left the SEALs to pursue a medical degree. Is that right?
I left the SEAls to pursue other things, go to college. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. Something health related. I mean, the only interest I'd ever had in anything quasi academic was, fitness related. So I was thinking, athletic trainer, strength and conditioning coach, maybe a stretch goal of like a physical therapist or something. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my mindset when I left the SEAL teams. I was dating a girl who was in grad school for physical therapy. So that was kind of my motivation behind all that. But I was in for the first Gulf War, which was, bombing campaign. And then they drove around and collected all the surrender flags. Right. So, I was thinking, America's just too dominant. We're never going to really be in a war again. What am I doing here? Just kind of, I've done this and we go do something else. Yeah.
So, and then how did you end up in medical school then?
Yeah. So, I wasn't even close to a high school graduate. I was a couple of years short in credits from graduating high school. So I had to go to junior college, just basically to get an equivalency of a high school diploma before I could even get into college. So I went to junior college for a couple of years. Did really well in junior college, a lot better than I was expecting, a lot better than I thought I was going to do. And because I thought I might want to be a physical therapist, and my wife was a physical therapist. I got married shortly after getting out, and my wife was a physical therapist, and she had some connections. And so I said, well, I'm going to go work at the San Diego Sports Medicine Center, which had strength and conditioning coaches, and it had athletic trainers, and it had chiropractors and massage therapists and doctors and physical therapists and everything. So, but in case I wanted to go to physical therapy school, you need 2,000 volunteer hours just to apply to a PT school.
Yeah.
And, 2,000 hours is a lot of hours. And so I said, well, I'm going to go start volunteering there. I volunteered there for about a week, and then they hired me as a physical therapy aide, was called. So basically I got ice and put people on E-stim and stuff like that. And then school went on, and, I was starting to see a higher academic potential in myself than I thought I had. And so it's like, yeah, maybe I will be a physical therapist. And then time went on a little more, and I was like, I don't really want to be a physical therapist. That's too limited. And all the young doctors that worked at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, because of my time in the SEAL teams, these guys were only a couple of years older than me, 2 to maybe 4 years older than me. And I, was hanging out with those guys, whatever, going on bike rides, doing, playing volleyball, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, you should be a doctor. Like, you should go to medical school. I like, pump the brakes there, Sparky. Like, let's set some realistic expectations there. Yeah. I didn't graduate high school. And then the owner of San Diego Sports Medicine Center, this doctor named Lee Rice, he overhears this conversation in the hallway, and he comes out and he says, Kirk, the question isn't could you get into medical school? The question is, would you want to go to medical school if you could get in? And I said, well, of course, like, who wouldn't want to be a doctor, right? Like, and that was my mindset in those days. And he's like, well, then you really got to try then, don't you? I mean, why wouldn't you try? And so that's really genesis of what made me apply to of even considering medical school, was just the fact that some doctors thought I could do it. And then I kind of got guilt tripped into it by Dr. Rice. So yeah, that was it. And again,
So
the only thing I knew about
it wasn't a lifelong passion or anything.
No, and the only thing I knew about doctors, again, was personal experience. So it was like,
right.
I'd seen doctors when I'd been injured in sports. Like, I played sports my whole life, and I was a SEAL. And the only time I ever saw a doctor was when I was injured. And so when I thought of a doctor, I thought of a orthopedic surgeon or a sports medicine doctor, and that was it. So
right.
that was really what I was applying to, but to be one of those things. I wasn't just applying to be a doctor. I didn't really think in those terms. Yeah.
So then you finished medical school and you went back to the SEALs, right?
Yeah. So so when it came time to apply to medical school, the going advice in those days was you should apply to like 20 schools, because you're not going to get into that many schools, and most people don't get in. So you want to play the odds and kind of apply for every school that you're competitive for. This is aging myself here, pre-internet. So I went to the bookstore and I got out the Kaplan Review book, and I started looking at the different medical schools and sort of what GPA and what MCAT score were competitive at different schools. And it was at that moment that I found out the military had their own medical school. I did not know that. And then I did some reading and a little research on that. I was already married. I already had a kid, had another kid on the way. And I learned that the military would pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And, all I'd have to do is be a doctor for the military after medical school for a certain amount of years. And that just seemed like a no-brainer to me. So I could support my family while going to medical school. And then I figured, what's the difference? I'll go there and I'll be an orthopedic surgeon there, or on the outside, doesn't matter. And then when I get out, I'll get it out. And I figured out, maybe I'll get an opportunity to go back to the SEAL teams and, contribute, give back to the community that had shaped me as a man, and of course, all that worked out. And insofar as I got back to the SEAL teams, and then I was training to be an orthopedic surgeon, but then everything changed once I got to the SEAL teams and figured out what kind of problems they actually had and what they actually needed help with and what I actually knew and what tools I actually had to help them. And everything changed, everything changed at that moment. They completely redirected my career as a doctor.
And that's when what you told me when we were chatting before is Matt Walker called you the OG of sleep. So that kind of led you down the path of becoming.
So what actually happened there was, as I said, the entire time I was in college, which was 6 years, because I did 2 years at junior college and then college. It's 5 years after your gap year. But that entire time I worked at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, and with the physical therapist. And I was really honestly doing the job of a physical therapist by the time I left. I'd been there so long. I had my own patient load and all that stuff. And so, like I said, San Diego Sports Medicine Center was a health mecca. It had every kind of health professional you could possibly imagine. I was really familiar with everybody's jobs. I'd done a little bit of everything. And when I got back to the SEAL teams, they had just received their funding to build a rehab facility for the SEALs, like a sports medicine rehab. Mm-hmm. And, the SEALs had never had that before. They didn't have any specialty in it. They don't have any people there who know how to do any of that stuff. So this was really starting from scratch. And it just so happens the funding takes 5-10 years to actually get the money. So they'd applied for this funding well before. Just so happened that they got the funding the month that I showed up at the SEAL teams as their new doctor. And they're like, well, you would be the perfect guy to be in charge of building this. And so I was literally down to like the design of the clinic, working with contractors on what to build out, hiring our first strength and conditioning coach, hiring our first nutritionist, hiring our first physical therapist, first physical therapy assistant, first, like you name it, like building out this facility. And like, not that it was my initiative, but I just landed there, by the grace of God at that moment, and built all of that out. And it wasn't solely me. I don't want to give the impression I went in there, did all this amazing stuff. Like there was a team of people around. But that was my role. And then once we built that facility out, then I worked with the hospitals to have ortho come through and do rounds, and, pain come through and do rounds, and chiropractors come through, and acupuncturists come through. And, so that we could have kind of every modality, everything that the SEALs needed, and it could all be in-house to save our guys time from driving to the hospitals and to the various clinics to get all these treatments. But once we hired all those people, and once we had all these experts in their field coming through and advising us and doing rounds for us and all that stuff, well, then I was the dumbest guy around, right? In the military, when they don't have anything else for you to do, they tell you to supervise. So that was it. So like, well, now you're in charge of all this, supervise all these people. And I was like, all right, that's not a real job, but okay, I'll do that. So, so I had an office in that clinic. And then, the thing is, SEALs they're not really forthcoming about their medical problems to medical providers, because the one person who can put them on the bench is the doctor, right? A healthcare provider can say, you're not fit to do your job right now because you have X, Y, and Z problems. So until we fix those problems, you can't be doing your job. And that's the worst fate in the world for a SEAL. So they usually don't tell their doctors anything. They kind of try to hide all their injuries, to the extent that they'll actually, lie to their Navy doctor and then go out in town and find a doctor to help them get what they actually need done. Right, and they'll pay cash out of their pocket so they can keep it under the radar and not have to lose their job. And what happened was, I had this office in there supervising, and the SEALs would do their therapy or workout or whatever. And then they'd drift by my office and kind of start chatting with me. And then they'd come in, close the door behind them and say, hey, just between me and you, because I was a SEAL, they trusted me to not disqualify them. And they said, well, let me tell you what's really going on. And like, I got this problem, that problem, this problem. And it was things like, my motivation sucks. My concentration sucks. I feel tired all the time. I'm giving a lecture. I can't pay attention while I'm giving the lecture. I definitely can't pay attention while somebody else is giving a lecture. I have to leave my house 3 or 4 times every morning because I pull out and realize I forgot my badge. I get down the road and realize I forgot something else. I keep coming back and forth. I walk in a room. I don't know why I'm there. I'm snappy with my kids. I'm snappy with my wife. I get in a lot of arguments at work. It's not really me. My body composition shifting. I'm working with the nutritionist. I'm working with the trainer. I'm doing everything right. Getting fatter. I'm getting weaker. I'm getting slower. I feel like I'm getting dumber. And then they'd be like, maybe I'm just getting old, doc. Right. And I'd be like, yeah, brother, you're 28. Like, it's all over. I mean, you're ancient now. And honestly, I didn't know. I didn't know how to help them. I was like, I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. And so the first thing I did was I started thinking about, it made me think of other wars, right? Because, growing up, I'd heard of things like shell shock, combat fatigue, PTSD, like these things that happen, these syndromes that happened in war. And this was, 8 or 9 years into the global war on terror. And I was like, well, maybe it's that. Unfortunately, when you go look those things up, nobody ever figured out what that was. They just called it syndrome. And it was similar, had similar symptoms and problems. But that wasn't very useful. It wasn't helping me. The one thing that I knew, though, is that the SEALs didn't have any diseases, right? And that's what I was trained in. I went to medical school. I learned how to recognize and treat disease. Well, they didn't have disease. They just weren't performing as well as they'd like to perform. Right. So I said, all right, well, let's figure out what this is. And I didn't really know. Now, the one thing that no SEAL actually complained to me about was sleep. they came in and they listed all these issues that they were having problems with, but nobody said anything about their sleep. And it wasn't until I started looking through the medical records online, because we had electronic medical records, and as I'm going through their medical records, I start noticing this trend that a lot of them seem to be taking Ambien. And then I go through all my shadow files, and I found out actually every single guy who's been in my office is taking Ambien. And I thought, oh, like I wonder if that, could there be any correlation there? So I started asking the guys, well, why are you taking Ambien? And they, well, because I can't go to sleep. Oh, why did you mention that? Well, whatever. I get by. Sleep's optional if you're a SEAL, right? It's a luxury.
Right.
And they would say, yeah, I go home and I can't sleep. I have a couple of drinks, I can't sleep. I'll take an Ambien. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I can't go back to sleep. And so I think, well, I'll go to the gym. I'll work out really hard. I won't take any naps. I'll stay up all day. I'll work throughout the day. When I come home tonight, I'll be really tired and I'll be able to give you a good night's sleep. Yeah, but you ask them, it's never worked once. Like they still can't sleep the next night, and the next night. They've been doing this for 5 years. And I say, well, just keep going. I guess it's gonna work eventually, right? And so anyway, I didn't know anything about sleep. I mean, I hadn't had a single class in medical school on sleep. I'd taken pharmacology. I knew that Ambien was what we call a Z drug, that it worked on GABA receptors. Okay. Damned if I knew what a GABA receptor did that was associated with sleep, or what actually happened while you slept. So I had to educate myself on that. And then once I started educating myself on sleep and what happens when you sleep, and what are the benefits of sleep, and what are the consequences when you don't sleep well, I pretty quickly realized that pretty much everything they had complained about could be attributed to poor sleep. I didn't think it would be. I didn't think that, hey, I'll get these guys to sleep and I'll fix everything. But it seemed like a pretty big lever to pull. And so the first thing I said was, let's get you guys off sleep, and off these sleep drugs. And the way that I went about it, because I knew the community, I knew the guys, I knew what motivated them, is I went about it purely from the anabolic hormone standpoint. I said, all your testosterone's made while you're asleep. Like, all your hormones are balanced while you're asleep. Your growth hormone's made while you're asleep. Testosterone's made while you're asleep. And so that's what all your anabolic repair is. And I would teach them that, hey, when you go to the gym, you don't get stronger, right? When you work out, you don't get stronger, you get weaker. By definition, you're going in there to weaken your muscles, damage your muscles, overload them. So that when you come out of the gym, you're not as capable as you walked into the gym. So when you get stronger while you're asleep. And then I talk to them about, neuroregulation of appetite. That happens while you're asleep. That affects fuel partitioning. That affects insulin sensitivity, all this stuff, your body composition. So that I pushed the buttons that I knew they were interested in. When I got them all to get off of Ambien and to minimize their drinking. And lo and behold, their performance, all the things they had been complaining about, started getting better. And then what I had measured, I'd measured their hormone levels, or their total testosterone, their free testosterone, sexual hormone binding globulin, estradiol, DHT, DHA, like all of that, IGF-1. And for their age, they were bad, like not just deficient, but almost non-existent, right? Like almost to where the place there would be clinically treatable. And some guys even were clinically treatable, but you still couldn't treat them, because if you give a SEAL a drug that he's dependent upon, he's no longer deployable, because then if he deploys and he can't get his drug, he's useless. And so they can't be on any mandatory medications. And so anyway, that's how all that came about. And then I found out, hey, we got guys off of sleep drugs. Their testosterone doubled, tripled, free testosterone doubled, tripled. The growth, the IGF-1 doubled, tripled. Inflammatory markers went down, oxidative markers went down. Their concentration improved, their mood improved, their motivation improved, their body comp improved, their physical performance improved. And that shaped the rest of my career.
And that kind of led you to develop a natural sleep product.
Well, yeah. So the problem I had was they were taking Ambien because they couldn't sleep, right? So
Right.
I had to come up with an alternative. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about sleep. I mean, by the time we get to that stage, I'd educated myself to some degree, but I was by no stretch of the imagination was an expert in that world. Um, and or even competent in that world. I was a neophyte, but I basically went to really conservative databases, like Cochrane database, PubMed, Google Scholar, academic level. And again, I couldn't give them drugs. So I'm like, what supplements help with sleep? And, I started looking through the supplements that help with sleep, educated myself about sleep and figured, okay, we'll try this, we'll try that. And when I started with just one, I don't know if you remember kind of back in those days, that was the big paleo CrossFit movement around those times. And vitamin D3 was this huge compound everybody's talking about. Vitamin D3, of course, is a hormone, not really a vitamin. And it has some impact on sleep. And so I was like, oh, well, all my guys are D3, if not deficient, they're at least really low on the bell curve. So let's give them D3. And of course that helped. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm being successful here. And then I learned, well, vitamin D3 requires magnesium as a cofactor, and magnesium actually helps with sleep. So let's add that. And so we kind of just piecemealed it together. And then because I had such a motivated audience and they're so responsive, I got them to help me figure out what's the right amount. Like, we just did it all through trial and error. There was no Amazon Prime back then. So they were buying everything locally, buying all the supplements locally. We kind of figured out which brands worked the best, what was the best dosage of which. And that came out with just like a handout. It's a printed out sheet. They'd go buy these. I explained basic sleep hygiene to them about, blue light and about making the room dark and cold and blah, blah, blah. And then, take these supplements and do this. And that was my approach to getting them off of the sleep drugs. Some guys had been on it so long that they're really sort of physiologically dependent. And I worked with a compounding pharmacy and I converted their Ambien to a serum so that I could titrate down by 1 milligram a week. So, they go 10 milligrams was 10 drops, and then they do 9 drops and 8 drops and all the way until they were off. At the same time, they were taking these over-the-counter nutritional supplements to improve their sleep. And honestly, to the best of my recollection, it was 100% successful. Every single guy who wanted to get off of Ambien, we got off of Ambien, and every single guy noticed a very significant improvement in their performance and overall health and well-being. And that success led the Navy to having me lecture a lot about this phenomenon, in which I ended up at events specifically for the military. I ended up sharing the stage with guys like Rob Wolf and John Wellborn and Dominic D'Agostino, and kind of like all of those kind of what we would now call health influencers. And then those guys started inviting me on their podcasts and inviting me to come lecture at other events and things like that. And then I just became the sleep guy. And like, I don't have any formal education. I'm not a board certified sleep doctor. And it's not even my primary focus, but that's what I'm best known for. I mean, I do overall lifestyle health optimization, but I'm known best for sleep because of all of that. The SEALs harangued me into making a product out of that handout to give, to make it easier for them. And so I figured out how to make a product and get it on the market, and we started marketing it, and that company still exists today.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a pretty good case study in the efficacy of it if if it worked on these seals. So, and now you told me you work with a lot of middle-aged men, high performers, and you've talked about sleep is you've changed your mindset a little bit on you've kind of had your 4 or 5 pillars of optimization, and you shifted that a little bit to where you said sleep is a foundation, and those four pillars branch off of that.
I used to say sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress mitigation were the four pillars of health.
Yeah.
And then after a few years, I was like, well, actually, exercise, nutrition, and stress mitigation are the pillars, but they sit on the foundation of sleep.
Right.
Because like the more you learn about sleep, the more you realize that none of those pillars can stand without sleep, right? You can eat really well all you want to. If you aren't sleeping well, it really doesn't matter. Like you're
Right.
going to crash and burn. Like your hormones are going to be dysregulated. Your appetite's going to be dysregulated. Your fuel partitioning is going to be dysregulated. Your exercise capacity is going to be hampered. Your recovery from exercise is going to be hampered. Your body compensates for lack of sleep by increasing stress hormones. And the whole idea of stress mitigation is to reduce stress hormones. So like those pillars just don't work if you aren't sleeping well. And so that's why I kind of shifted my approach to all of that. Yeah.
And it seems like kind of, once we hit, I don't know, 35 or so, we start on this path of entropy. And why is sleep more important? I mean, it's important for everyone, but it seems like it's more important for middle-aged men more than anything, just because we kind of are on this path of degradation.
Yeah. Well, so think of it like this. The only time that you're actually getting better in a sustainable way, the only time you're getting better at anything is while you're asleep. So if I'm trying to learn something today, I'm studying, I'm taking college courses, whatever. I'm not truly learning that information. I'm putting it in, right? I'm becoming familiar with it. I'm putting it in my brain. But until I go to sleep, I don't transfer it from my short-term memory to my long-term memory. And until I transfer it into my long-term memory, I can't start connecting it to other things that I know. So if I learn a piece of information and I go to sleep tonight, and this is what dreams are primarily about. During REM sleep, you're going to rehearse, review kind of everything that you thought about today, everything that you experienced today. You won't be conscious, like you won't remember all of that, right? But you're going to rehearse and review everything from today, and probably from yesterday, and a little bit from the day before, and a little bit from the day before, and all that. But after I do that several times, I start connecting that new piece of information to something else that I know, or something else that I've experienced, or something that's similar to. And now I start forming more and more durable pathways to this. And now I can access it from a bunch of different angles. And now that's something I actually know. Like I actually know this piece of information, and I know how it's relevant to a lot of different things. So I've learned something legitimately, right? If I learn a physical skill, I rehearse it during the day to some degree, but I rehearse it more at night. And my muscle memory that we think about, that muscle memory is actually being formed while I'm asleep. We already talked about exercising. I go to the gym, I get weaker, right? I damage my tissues. I stretch, like I try to contract a muscle and I rip it apart while I'm doing it. And I actually damage these tissues. The little actin fibers need to be regenerated. And my body, my brain and my body are going to compensate for what I did today by trying to make that muscle more capable of doing that tomorrow, right? So it's going to make that muscle a little thicker and a little stronger. That's how I'm going to get progressively stronger, because my body is going to go, well, we did this much weight, this much tension today, and it damaged us. Let's try to repair to where if we did that again tomorrow, it wouldn't damage us, right? To where that's something I could routinely do. Or if I'm running, well, I'm going to increase my mitochondrial biogenesis, right? I'm going to increase angiogenesis, right? I'm going to grow new blood vessels. I'm going to get more blood supply. I'm going to get more GLUT4 receptors. I'm going to get, like I said, more ATP production, whatever, different receptors on my cells to make my muscles more capable of doing what I did today, tomorrow. So another way to think about that in simpler terms is that the whole reason I go to sleep tonight is to repair from today, right? Anything I've damaged or anything I've depleted, I need to repair. I need to restock the shelves. I need to repair any damage. So when my immune system is functioning at the highest, so I'm fighting off infection, parasites, bacterial, viral infections. I'm doing that more while I'm asleep. I already talked about forming new memories. I'm emotionally categorizing events. I'm rehearsing things that happened to me the day. I'm making sense of that in my brain. My muscles are repairing any tendons, ligaments, anything I've overstretched, overextended. That's going to repair tonight while I'm asleep. And to the extent that I do that, I can repair. And then there's another little component of what I call prepare. So I'm going to repair and prepare. And that's just me, like I'm restocking nutrients in my cells, right? I'm replenishing my glycogen stores in my liver and in my muscles, and I'm replenishing neurotransmitters in my brain that have been depleted. I'm getting rid of waste products, all this, but I'm repairing and preparing for tomorrow. And if I could do that 100%, right? I fixed everything that I damaged. I restocked every shelf. I replaced every molecule that I depleted. I would wake up exactly the same every day. I would never age. I'd be exactly the same every day. To the extent that I can't do that is the extent that I age. Now, back that up. When you're younger, you sleep longer, don't you? Right? Like little kids sleep 10 hours, 12 hours. And they don't just repair and prepare. They grow, right? They wake up the next day taller and stronger and smarter and faster. And they continue to grow until about 25-ish. That's about our peak. And then you say entropy kind of weighs in. There's almost a plateau. It's like imperceptible kind of, you're saying, or what you say, like around a 10-year window, 25 to 35. And you kind of feel the same you've always felt. And then it gets a little harder to recover and gets a little harder to do everything. You start noticing that you're fighting entropy a little more. And that's essentially what aging is. And so if you conceive of sleep that way, it really becomes the most foolish thing in the world to abandon. But it is the first thing everybody abandons, right? When somebody has to travel and they don't really have time to travel, when do they squeeze it in? They take a red eye, right? Like, I'm going to take a nighttime flight. I'm going to get up super early and take an early flight, or stay up really late and fly through the night. If you have a project that you really got to get done at work, where do you compensate for that? Most likely you're going to do that tonight when you should be sleeping. It's like, well, I'm going to work a little bit later, which means I'm going to get home later. I'm going to eat later. I'm going to go to bed later. Whatever the case, like, sleep is the one thing that we kind of consider negotiable. Now, to an extent, that's true, right? Because we don't have to sleep perfectly every single night to be healthy. I tell all my clients that everything in the world is ruled by the Pareto distribution, right? Like 20% of the trees have 80% of the leaves. 20% of your employees create 80% of the value. 20% of your effort results in 80% of your benefit. 20% of the stars in the universe emit 80% of the light. Like that distribution is everywhere in nature. And I encourage my clients to think of it that way. Like, if you can do everything right, if you can live pretty close to ideal 80% of the time, not only can you handle a stressor 20% of the time that's suboptimal, less than ideal, like I'm not going to get as much sleep as I need, I'm not going to get the food or nutrients that I need, I'm not going to be able to work out like I usually do, I'm not going to control my stress the way I usually do, whatever that is, there's 20% of the time. Not only can you handle that because you've done everything right 80% of the time, you need that stressor. In fact, that's the whole reason that you're doing everything right, is so that when you are doing everything right and there's an additional stressor to your life, you're going through a bankruptcy, you're going through a divorce, you're going through the death of a really close loved one, you're going through an injury or whatever it is, like you're going through something and you can't live a life ideal, right? You can't do everything you're supposed to do. And not only can you now handle that stressor, that's the whole point of doing everything right, so that we can handle stressors. The difference between being 25 and 75 is how well you can handle an insult or a stressor, right? Can you fall off of a 3-foot tall cabinet when you're 25 years old and bounce back up and walk up? Of course, like that's no big deal. Like maybe you get a little pain. Probably not going to get injured per se. But if you're 75 and you fall off of something, well, what's the difference? Right? The difference is you don't have the same resources. You don't have the same muscle mass. You don't have the same neuromuscular coordination. You can't move as fast. You have the same balance. And if you get injured, it's going to be a lot worse injury. It's going to take a lot longer to recover. Same thing's true if you get pneumonia. Same thing's true if you get some DNA mistranscription and you're more susceptible to cancer as you get older because you don't repair DNA as well. You don't repair your muscles as well. You don't repair your tendons as well. You can't fight off infections as well. So it's a lack of resources. And like I said, all of the resources are stockpiled at night. So the better you can sleep throughout your life, the more resources you can have later on in life. And that's sort of what this longevity medicine is all about that everybody talks about. It's lifestyle medicine. It's doing everything right, the best you can, as frequently as you can, to the best of your ability, as often as possible, so that when you get the flu, when you get in a car crash, when you go through a bankruptcy, you can handle that physiological stressor.
And then it sounds like, just going back to training for middle-aged men and building muscle, it almost, just from everything you just said, sleep is that underappreciated third link in building muscle and recovery. So if you have the stress on the muscles through the actual workout, you have the amino acids helping to support that kind of like anabolic resistance we start getting more of as we get older. Sleep is kind of the third leg in that triangle, if you will, but it doesn't get recognized as much for like muscle building and recovery as I think the other two do.
Right. And we can say your kids have more resources. When you're younger, you have more resources. But what are those resources really? Those resources are muscle mass, it's hormones, right? Yeah. It's neurons, it's vascular blood flow, all these types of things that all respond to exercise and all respond to sleep and all respond to nutrition. And I think the underappreciated aspect of overall health and performance is that, just like anything else, it's a consistency game. We all got duped. I don't know how old you are, but you look like you're probably within 10 or 12 years of my age or something like that. So we all grew up with a Rocky montage of, you're broken down, mediocre midwit, and then you train really hard for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, 3 months, and then, rising of the Phoenix, like burn off all you, and like you're the totally new machine. That's not the way anything works, right? That's not how finances work. That's not how it's not how your career works. That's not how your relationships work. And that's not how your health works. It's the daily things. It's these really small things. Like my, the podcast I was on earlier, like the mantra of his training program is move the dirt. Like every day you go out, you move the dirt. Like you're digging a hole or you're filling in a hole, whatever. There's a dirt pile, you got to move the dirt. And some days you're moving it with a teaspoon, and some days you're moving it with a back end hoe or something like there's different capacities every day. But you go out and you move the dirt every day, and you do a little bit every day. And it's a game of consistency. It's the same way you get smarter. It's the same way you build a business. It's the same way you build relationships. It's the same way you build your finances. It's the same way you parent your children. It's the same way, right? Like you relate to your spouse. It's the little things every single day. Right. And what I tell patients and clients all the time is, this is a very unpopular message. And I wish it weren't true. But the truth of the matter is that it's really, 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 really hard to get in shape the first time in your 40s or your 50s, God forbid, right? So if you don't have muscle mass, right? Like we know one of the best predictors of not only infirmary, like, just the quality of your life when you get older, but your risk of death. Like we know a big predictor of that morbidity and mortality is muscle mass. Well, you're a trainer, you know this better than most people. It's really, really hard to put on muscle mass. Right? Really hard. Like when you start training a woman and she says, I don't want to look like a bodybuilder, you just don't worry.
Don't worry.
Like, guarantee you that's not a problem. Like just something to work out, right? And like I literally have been working out my entire life. I got my first weight set when I was 8 years old, and I I have not taken any substantial time off, and I'm 56 now. Like, I've been working out my whole life. I probably have about 10 pounds of muscle mass more than maybe 15 pounds, maybe. That would be stretched, but I probably have about 10 pounds more muscle mass than I would have had if I would have never trained, right? But at my peak, right? But at 56, I probably have way more muscle mass because I've maintained it. But it would be like, I tell people all the time right now, even though I've been working out my whole life and I've been on hormone replacement for 6 years. So like, I'm in the best sort of metabolic physiologic state I could be to put, like, to be fit and strong and have muscle mass. But I can't put on muscle mass right now. Like, there's no amount of drugs. I could take all the anabolic steroids. I could do anything I wanted to. I'm not going to put on muscle in my 50s. Like, that's just not realistic. There might be a few genetic outliers who can do that. And if you've never been in shape, we know, like, you can kind of hypervascularize and, pull in nutrients and glycogen to muscles and give the appearance of putting on a lot of muscle mass. If you're exercise naive, you could maybe do a little bit of that. But like, if you're in shape in your 20s and then you totally abandon it until your 50s, you're not going to put on a bunch of muscle mass to carry you into your 70s, right? The best you can do is maintain what you have when you start working out again in your 50s. And that's the game I'm in right now. Like, I'm just trying to slow down the rate that I lose muscle. And instead of losing, I don't know, I can't remember what the stat is, but it's something around 5% per decade or something. Well, maybe I can, if I work out really hard, I can keep that to 2% per decade or something like that, so that I have a little more muscle when I do slip on the ice in my 70s. I'm less likely to fall. If I do fall, I'm more likely to catch myself, have the strength to catch myself, have a more controlled fall. If I do get injured, I'm more likely to be able to recover from that injury, because I have muscle mass, because I've stayed in shape, because I have mobility, because I have flexibility, because I'm metabolically, nutritionally, hormonally healthy. Maybe I can recover from that insult better than, well, I definitely can recover better than if I hadn't done that stuff, but maybe I can completely recover from that, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's the consistency. And then I think it's so hard to build muscle because the amount of work you need to put in when you get older, and we just don't have the time either.
You have other responsibilities as you get older.
Right.
You have more myostatin as you get older. You have less blood supply when you get older. You're neuromuscular, like, you're not as innervated. You don't have as many alpha fibers. You aren't as neuromuscularly coordinated. You can't recruit muscles as well as you could. Like, there's all sorts of deficiencies as you get older, and you can minimize that change as you get older, but you can't avoid those changes. And so it's a real uphill battle to try to get in shape for the first time when you get older. Now, I still encourage people to do that. You're still going to be better off. If you've totally let yourself go for 20, you've traded your health for success, your health for wealth or whatever for 20 or 30 years, I still encourage you to do it. But just like, you need to set the expectations and be realistic that, you're not going to start looking like, who's that, a blonde bodybuilder dude who still looks like he's 25 years old, O'Hearn or something, Mike O'Hearn, Mike. Yeah. Like, you're not gonna look like that guy. Like, sorry. Right. If you didn't look like him when you were 25, you're not gonna look like him basically, you're not gonna look better than you looked at 25 in your 50s, no matter what you do, unless you had been a couch potato your entire life, maybe. But realistically, you have to set the expectations that that it is a game of consistency to build, and then it's a game of consistency to fight the entropy of life. And as far as, like, the resources that you're going to have to go into the battle of old age are largely determined by how hard you work in the beginnings of your life.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned hormones and being on testosterone replacement. When should men go on that? You and I were talking a little bit about this offline. It's just like, people just go on it without knowing really the rationale why. But it sounds like there's a lot of lifestyle things men should be doing first before they go on it. So what are some of the things that you think about?
Sometimes it's simultaneous. When I work with clients, it depends on how old you are. There's a lot of nuance to it. I can tell you, if I knew Well, no, I take it back. I've been on HRT for 8 years. I started at 48. If I knew at 48 what I know now, I probably wouldn't have started HRT yet. Uh, Most likely I'd be on it by now, no matter what. But there are ways to improve, like there are pharmaceuticals and supplements and peptides and things that you can do to improve your own production. And as long as you can get up until that 80th percentile or so of the anabolic hormones, um, I would recommend sort of exhausting that pathway. The reason being that although I can now control my testosterone and make it exactly what I want it by calibrating the syringe and how much I put in there, I can make my testosterone whatever I want it to be. But 8 years into it, I have significantly, I've so diminished my ability to produce testosterone that if I stop, I'm going to have maybe half of what I had when I started doing HRT, right? Probably not even that much. And then I'm going to have to do all sorts of things to try to build my production back up. And it's going to be really hard to get up to a really healthy level. And so that's why I discourage people from starting testosterone at 30 or 35 or 40. And I have a former Green Beret, 62, 63. He's still not on HRT. And he is still in the 90th percentile of testosterone. And we've done that just by, using compounds to encourage his own production. And so if he stops, but he decides, hey, I'm going to go to Costa Rica for 2 months and go surfing and I don't want to take anything with me, he can go do it. No problem. Yeah. He's going to come down a little bit, but he's going to be pretty healthy, pretty fine.
What is the 90th percentile? And just to put a number
It's
to,
about
is that like closer to 1,000?
900 about 900 for total. So the original Framingham data was 250 to either 1150 or 1200, depending on whose data you read. What we've done as a society is, as people get progressively less healthy, we just lower the expectations. Yeah. And so, when you look at LabQuest or LabCore, most of these hormone panels now, their reference range just keeps going down every year. Like the high end of normal, most of them now is 900. Well, that's actually the 90th percentile, or not even. It's like the 85th or something percentile of the original data. But people's testosterone is gradually getting lower, and they're just kind of moving the bell curve with that, which would be the same as moving the bell curve with body composition or anything else, right? Just 25% ain't all that bad. You're in the middle now, or, you would have been fat 15, 20 years ago. Now you're kind of average. But yeah, so if you can get up in, 85th, 90th percentile is really kind of where you want to be. There was a study done where they, is a pure observational trial of about 30,000 or 40,000 men. I can't remember, over 10 years, multi-center trial here and in the UK. And then they just looked at morbidity and mortality and within the bell curve, and they were just using total testosterone. This is an old study, it's 25 years old, probably by now. And what they found is that the lowest risk of all morbidity, all mortality, so any disease, any pathology or death from any cause, the lowest risk was in that upper, what they call quintile. So 80th percentile to 100 percentile. And that ended up out of 1,100, that ends up being right around 900, right? Is the 80th percentile. And every quintile, so when you go from the 80th, from 80 to 100, you go down to 60 to 80th percent, right? So every quintile you go down, the absolute risk increases either 20 or 30% each quintile. So by the time you get down to the lowest quintile, you have twice the risk of death, twice the risk of any disease. And if that were vitamin C, it would be medical malpractice to not keep everybody up in the upper quintile. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Why would you give anybody double the risk and still be in the normal bell curve? You would just say, no, normal's over here in this range. But because testosterone is controversial, it didn't grab the traction it should have. But that's my rationale for saying that that's where people should be. And if you look at a healthy, fit, active 25-year-old, which is kind of what I do with my labs, I say my ideal would be that I could remove your personal information and hand your labs to a colleague and say, who do you think this is? And my colleague would say, it's a 25-year-old athletic, healthy athletic man, based on those numbers. And so that's what I try to reapproximate. Now, by no stretch of the imagination am I making you 25 again, but I'm giving you at least a shot of some potential close to that by keeping your kind of everything, that all the levers that I can pull to make you sort of optimally healthy. I try to keep looking like that.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing this right, because this is kind of crazy. So that bottom end of that range that is considered normal, it's got to be, I think the last time I looked, it was like around 300 or 2 something.
250 is the bottom end of normal, usually somewhere around 250.
So that's got to put you in that 4th quintile, right? I mean, or somewhere around there. So you're basically, if you're in the normal range, you're...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're not talking about outside of the normal range. So that lowest quintile was still in the normal range.
In the normal... Oh, okay, got you. Yeah. So in that increases your all-cause mortality by 40.
So it's twice, it's doubled. Yeah.
Gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So you don't want to be there. I tell people all the time, the normal range or reference range or clinical range, whatever euphemism they put up there, that's a population data, right? So if I told you that your body composition is normal for an American, does that give you any sense of comfort? Like, no, the average American's fat.
Right.
And being in the normal range just means that you're within the bell curve. So you could be really fat compared to the average American who's already fat and still be in the normal range. And that's not what anybody wants. So I like all of my clients, regardless of what we're talking about, whether we're talking about hormones or we're talking about measures for inflammation or oxidation and insulin sensitivity, hemoglobin, hematocrit, like anything that is ideally high, I want you up in that upper 25th%. Anything that's ideally low, I want you in the lower kind of 25%. Because that's what a healthy, active 25-year-old is. And if you had the health of a 25-year-old, you have the best shot at handling any insult, whether that's a disease or an injury or trauma or stressor or poor sleep or poor nutrition, whatever the stressor is that's bothering you. Like you're the most resilient and the best capable of responding to that when you're at your peak health. And for men, that's right around 25 years old.
Gotcha. And then go back to the testosterone. So it sounds like the first line of defense is the lifestyle factors, but as we get older, there's a ceiling on that, right?
You always have to do the lifestyle factors, because so if you sleep 6 hours a night instead of 8 hours a night, and you do that for 10 nights in a row, your insulin sensitivity has gone down 30%. Your total testosterone's gone down 30%. Your free testosterone is on its way down, but it might not have responded that fast. But a lot of people sleep 6 hours a night on average their whole life, right? Now you add bad food to that, lack of activity to that. So I don't know what your normal is. Like, I don't know what you're capable of until I fix your lifestyle. So if you come to me and you're 35, you're 40, you're 45 years old, I don't really want to put you on testosterone, especially if like maybe you're within 10 or 20% of where I want you to be anyway. Let's fix your lifestyle. Now, if you come to me, if your lifestyle's a train wreck and your hormones are okay, well, then I have a lot of confidence that maybe, hey, if we get your lifestyle in place, we might not need any hormones. But if you come to me, and which a lot of my clients are guys who are pretty smart, pretty well versed, and been working pretty hard their whole lives, especially, the former special forces guys, first responders, like they exercise, they're doing their best. Like they might even have pretty decent sleep. and the hormones in it. So like I'm only going to be able to change your lifestyle 10 or 15%, and your hormones are off by 50%. Like we're going to start these two things simultaneously. And the other complexity of testosterone, which we were the first ones to document when I was in the military, we did a study. It's a published study. There's an almost 1-to-1 correlation between total testosterone and total time in bed. It turned out to be a 0.87 correlation, which is as close to causal as about any study's ever going to find. And so if your testosterone is low, you're not going to sleep well. But if you don't sleep well, your testosterone is going to be low. So we're kind of in a catch-22 at this point. It's like we're kind of don't really know what we're going to do about that. So in that situation, we're like, all right, let's see what we can do to encourage your testosterone production, or maybe we're going to put you on short-term testosterone therapy, get your lifestyle in order, back off, see what we can do without actually giving you hormones. So the point is there's a lot of nuance to it, but it's hard to sleep well if you don't have good hormones. And you look at it like a perimenopausal woman, that's exacerbated even more, right? Because their hormone dysregulation is the primary reason they aren't sleeping well usually.
Yeah.
And so you can't just say, well, start sleeping better. Well, I'm not sleeping well because my hormones are off. It's like, all right, well, let's get your hormones in order and then get you sleeping well. And then see if you can do without them for another 5 years or 10 years or something. I don't know. My whole goal is always to be minimally interventionist, right? I want you to do as much as you can possibly. I want to get you as close to your goals as we possibly can through just lifestyle. But often we can't get exactly where we want to be, but we kind of maximize the lifestyle. And then we use supplemental things, right? Like pharmacy, supplemental, nutritional, supplemental recovery devices, a sauna, an ice bath, laser therapy, IR, near far IR, recovery tools. Those are all supplemental. But if we can idealize, like if you're 25, you don't need any of that crap, right? The delta is going to be probably less than 1%. If you're 55, the delta might be as high as like 5%. Like you might notice a big shift in that. But we always want to focus on lifestyle first. And it's just not that complex, man. It's not everybody wants to make it complex and make it look complex. There's a lot of money to be had in making it look really complex and telling people you have the solution. But, sleep 8 hours a night, eat whole foods, real foods. Like, go ahead and get fat off of eating steak and broccoli or chicken and, mashed potatoes. Even like, I don't care. Like, eat whole foods and get obese. That's not going to happen, right? So eat whole foods, get good sleep, exercise daily. At least stay active. You don't have to be training for sport and performance, but, get your heart rate up, get some zone 2, get a little bit of, get a little strength training in there, and then control your stress through prayer, community, whatever, breath work, meditation, yoga, whatever it is you want to do, like control your stress, optimize your lifestyle. It's not that tough to do. And if you're under 40, it's almost certain you're going to need very little on top of that. The older you get, the more things help. Like this big peptide craze. I've been using peptides with my patients for eight years. There's a lot of benefit to peptides, but I can tell you most of the time that a peptide really makes a difference, they're 50 or older.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Because what you're doing is you're compensating for sort of natural depletion of things, right? Like, just like your hormones, like your hormone production slows down over your lifetime. Your vascularization decreases over time. Your neurogenesis decreases over time. And these are the things that peptides help with. Like they're kind of helping you recover some of that. They're helping you recover some of your repair mechanisms or your ability to produce new synapses in your brain or maintain your myelination in your brain or all those types of things. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is doing the same thing, grow new blood vessels to, exercise, under perfused areas, those types of things that just kind of happen with that entropy that happens with life. That's what the peptides are really helpful for. If you're young and healthy and fit, you've always been young and healthy and fit, you're probably wasting your money. Right. Honestly.
Yeah. Okay. I want to take a slight shift here and ask you about sleep and marital communication. So you had a podcast you did with your wife, Brandy, several weeks ago. And you were talking about how just that night of bad sleep changes your threat perception and cause communication issues in marriage and stuff like that. So,
Yep.
what's going on there?
Yeah. So I think we talked about the couples trial in there. There's a lot of research in this area. The couples trial is really profound, really easy to understand. Um, they took monogamous couples who had been in long-term relationships and knew each other pretty well, and put them in this experiment and said, "Hey, tomorrow we're going to give you money to go hang out, do whatever you want to do, or any responsibilities you have. Like, we're going to make sure all that's taken care of, so that you have a free day with you and just you and your, you and your significant other, your spouse, your wife, your husband, whatever it was. So you do that, but the caveat is that one of you is going to get 2 hours less sleep
Okay.
than you ordinarily do, right? So just one of you. So, and then you come back the next day and you ask some questions. So one person in the couple has slept 8 hours, and one couple in the couple has slept 6 hours, and then they're going to spend the whole day together and come back and answer questions at the end of the day. And what they found is it doesn't matter which one you sleep restrict, is what we call that. When we take away a couple of hours, we call it sleep restriction. So it doesn't matter which one you sleep restrict. Both of them, because they separate them for the interviews, so they answer questions independently. And they find that both couples perceive their partner as being the flawed one the next day, right? That day. So it's like, well, he or she was a little less communicative, didn't seem quite as happy, wasn't quite as engaging, wasn't quite as talkative, wasn't quite as affectionate, all like everything that you base a relationship off of. That was true for both. And they both thought it was the other. And what's happening there is, when I don't get enough sleep, right? I didn't repair 100%. I didn't prepare 100%. I didn't rehearse everything that I was going to rehearse. I didn't restock all the neurotransmitters. I didn't get enough glucose in my brain, whatever it is. I didn't get enough repair. And so my body compensates the next day. It takes 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours and be prepared for the next day. If I only sleep 6 hours, tomorrow still comes at exactly the same time. I still have to do all the same things. And my body compensates. My brain and my body compensate by secreting more stress hormones, because stress hormones make you feel alert. Cortisol gets this bad rep. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Kinda, it is, but it's also the alert promoting hormone. So when you're the lowest cortisol you have in any 24-hour period is while you're asleep, and deep sleep is the lowest cortisol you'll ever have. It goes first sleep cycle, it's the lowest it'll possibly be. As you recover over the course of the night, as you start repairing and restoring and restocking shells and all this, your cortisol gradually increases. And if there was no alarm clock and no light, no change in temperature, and nothing stimulated you to be awake, you would still wake up after approximately 8 hours. Why would you do that? Because cortisol is what wakes you up. Like, cortisol is what keeps you alert in proportion to your environment. And so when you first wake up in the morning, what's waking you up is just the alert promoting neurotransmitters of norepinephrine and epinephrine and cortisol. And those hormones and neurotransmitters is how you're interacting with the world. If something really stressful happens, those go higher. When those go to the maximum level we can possibly produce, we call that fight or flight. And what happens in fight or flight? In fight or flight, my body makes a physiologic shift. My brain has determined that we are at a state to where the only thing that matters is getting away from this threat. That's what fight or flight means, right? That's, 200 years ago, that's seeing a tiger, walking behind you on a trail, or a grizzly bear, or something like that. Somebody pointing a gun at you, or whatever. Something that is a severe threat to you or someone you care about who's with you. And you hit maximum stress hormones. And your body has made the choice. We're going to make a physiologic shift to where all of our resources are going to be used to get away from this threat. So my heart rate's going to increase. My blood pressure is going to increase. My blood glucose is going to increase. That's one of the things cortisol does. It causes you to mobilize stored glycogen increase my blood glucose. My reflexes are going to get faster. My pain threshold is going to go down. My peripheral blood flow to my skin is going to decrease in case I get cut. I don't want to bleed to death. My pupils are going to dilate so I can see more. My lungs are going to increase their capacity, right? You don't use 100% of your lungs normally. So that's going to expand. I'm going to be able to breathe in more oxygen. I'm going to have higher blood pressure, higher blood glucose, faster reflexes. My muscle strength is going to increase. My muscle endurance is going to increase. My pupils, like I said, are going to dilate. However, there is a consequence, like there's a trade-off to this, right? And the trade-off is none of the other stuff is happening anymore. I'm not digesting food anymore. I'm not producing sex hormones anymore. I'm not repairing anything. My immune system's not functioning. My gut motility, digestion, none of that's happening. Because the only thing that matters is getting away from this threat. Now, the most interesting thing about that, though, is when you're in that life or death situation, thinking is too slow. You need to react. That's why your reflexes have gotten faster, right? Because what you want is just to react instinctively. When that thing moves, you want to be moving before you can process what actually happened. You just know that's a threat, that moved, you're going the other way. So you shut down the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that you're thinking about. That's your executive functioning. That's your planning, thinking, strategy, problem solving. You don't want to think. You don't have time to think. You need to react. Like if you're in a fist fight, you don't think, oh, he's starting to throw a punch. Now I'm watching his shoulder. I see his punch coming towards me. I'm going to do this. You just have to react, right? And that's why training and fighting is so important. Well, that same thing happens, right? If I sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours, my body compensates by secreting more stress hormones the next day. So I get a little closer to fight or flight. Like I don't go to fight or flight, but I get a little closer and I impair my prefrontal cortex a little bit. And my amygdala, these little walnut kind of regions of my brain over here that gives me the threat perception, that gets stimulated by epinephrine and norepinephrine actually, and cortisol. And so I perceive everything as being more threatening. So think about this. If somebody's shooting at you and you meet somebody new, what are you analyzing that person for when you meet them? Whether or not they're a threat, whether or not they're going to shoot at you.
Yeah.
Are they going to help me? Are they going to hurt me? Or are they trying to kill me too? And so that's what you're doing. When you start impairing your prefrontal cortex, you're looking for threats and you're looking for something threatening in everybody's face. You're looking at a threatening glare. You're trying to, if they're talking to you, you're trying to perceive their words. Are those threatening words? And so if I've ramped up my stress hormones and I'm trying to communicate with my spouse the next day, I'm trying to figure out, was that a passive aggressive comment? Was that snide? Was that a little dig at me? I'm much more likely to think it is because I'm much more likely to perceive everything my spouse does as threatening. I'm also more likely to think everybody's more threatening. Everybody's more out to get me. So my overall joy in life, my overall relationship with everybody, my communication with every person on this planet, my perception of everybody else's communication with me is going to be affected by me not sleeping well or not sleeping enough.
So the threats and you become more reactive too, right? So it sounds like even just being aware of that as couples, like, being aware when my wife has had a bad night's sleep. Okay, well,
right.
I just need to give her a little space.
Yeah.
Just having that awareness before anything else.
Yeah. My wife and I communicate that all the time. I'll get up some days, maybe I didn't sleep well, or maybe it's something else. Like, I don't know, but I might just be off that day and I recognize I'm off and I just say, hey, baby, if I seem off today, I am. Don't take it personally. I don't have any problems with you. There's no, I'm not upset about anything, but if I seem a little off, I just am. So, don't take it personally. That goes a long way. It goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so last question for you, then I'll let you go. So I saw an article in Frontiers of Neuroscience, and it was a case study of one, not like a clinical trial or anything, but it was an advanced Alzheimer's patient who was given psilocybin and regained speech, memory, bladder control. So it had a big effect in over like a 20-hour period, which was astounding. And I know you've done some work in psychedelics and also to the extent hyperbarics, but what are those doing? So I know there's a lot of information on the positive effects it has on PTSD and stress, but Is there anything in brain health that makes sense there? Like anything that it's doing from a neuro perspective?
Yeah. So yeah, I saw that report that you talked about. I think it's a press release, but that's shocking. Like that's a shocking
Yeah.
finding. But honestly, it's not surprising to me at all. The best way I can summarize this is telling you about a colleague of mine. So I have a colleague he's a medical doctor. He's board certified in neurology and he's board certified in psychiatry. He also moved down to the Amazon and lived with a shaman for 6 years and learned all about psychedelics. Um, and he's an expert in psychedelics, but he's also an expert in TBI and PTSD because of his career, like his education. And he told me, I remember this like it was yesterday, and it was probably at least 10 years ago. He told me, he said, if I take every tool available to me as a neurologist and every tool available to me as a psychiatrist, it's not 1/10 of what not 1/10 of the efficacy of what I can get from a single treatment of psychedelics and the shamanistic world, right? And he's not a hyperbolic guy. He had seriously thought about that, and that was his honest assessment of it. And my experience in sending patients or recommending that treatment, like I don't administer psychedelics. I don't have the expertise to do that, but I work with organizations that do that. And so when I refer people for that, and I, and sometimes I'm with them when they do their experience, like I have seen amazing transformations. And these are guys, most often these are guys who've been working with pain specialists and neurologists and psychiatrists and psychologists for 7 to 10 years before they actually go to these psychedelics. And everything that they've done over the past 7 to 10 years have not been anywhere close to the effect that they get from this single night of this ceremony or treatment or whatever you want to, whatever you call it. They call it various things. And unfortunately, we don't know how all of this is working. We know some of the mechanisms. These are plant medicines, so there's discrepancies from one plant to the next. The concentrations of everything isn't the same. Obviously, if you use psilocybin, the active ingredient in mushrooms, there's other compounds in the mushrooms that are affecting the outcome. Again, it's not standardized. It's however the mushroom grows is how it grows. Ayahuasca is similar. There's root and just tree bark, and it's made in this brew. It's not super calculated. The most quantifiable thing is ibogaine, which comes from the root of the shrub in Africa, iboga plant, and they have distilled that down to a measurable salt so that they can then say this is 850 milligrams of ibogaine. Now there's still a little bit of difference from one plant to the next that you're kind of producing it from, but that's kind of the most quantified one is ibogaine. It also happens to be the harshest, kind of has like the hardest sort of journey when you do it. In the actual experience, the ceremony night, treatment night, whatever you want to call that, it's like, that's a light show sort of, there's like some emotions there and some thoughts but overall it's just kind of like something akin to watching a really powerful movie or reading a really powerful book or something. It's kind of like this experience that isn't super quantifiable and you can't really explain how is that helping somebody. There's some core concepts in there that it's giving you an opportunity to see yourself from a non-judgmental, more objective standpoint. We don't know why that happens, but it kind of gets rid of the ego during that experience. So a lot of people describe it as though I was watching myself watch a movie of myself, and and so I'm twice removed from that experience, and so I more objectively watch that thing as though I'm watching a movie, and that I don't have as much like defense, like built-in defense to making my actions right in that experience. And so I'm kind of reviewing my life in that respect. In that response, not everybody experiences that. Sometimes it's, completely tangential, non sequitur, just like these randomly generated visual hallucinations and thought hallucinations and emotions, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the overall consensus is that it will show you parts of yourself that you haven't been comfortable looking at before. Whether that's one big thing or a pattern of behaviors that have been going on in your life for a long time. And so that's sort of the psycho-spiritual summary that people will give of that actual experience. Now, what we know, say sort of more physiologically, is, when I gave that fight or flight example, I talk about the two walnuts, the amygdala, right? The amygdala in my brain, those are my alarm system, my alert system, my threat system. And those are calibrated throughout my life to have some pattern recognition based on my experiences. This is where a lot of what we call prejudice comes from. It's like, well, I've noticed this pattern, and when these things happen, I think this might be the case. And that can lead to, that can be an appropriate pattern recognition. It can be an inappropriate pattern recognition. But either way, what's happening is you're responding to the threat. And the emotions precede the thought. So you emotionally feel threatened before you really understand why you feel threatened. And then your brain usually goes in there and backfills that story to tell you the story, tell whatever story it is to explain why you feel threatened. And it's not always an accurate system. It's by default, it's wired to make you hypersensitive to threat, right? Because if you're wrong and the threat isn't there, all right, no big deal. But if you're wrong and the threat is there, you die or you get hurt or whatever. So you're naturally skewed to perceive danger, right? And that's what's kept us alive. Like, we're not a very capable animal if you think about it. Without a gun, like, how many animals could you really beat up? I mean, we're not that capable. We're not very fast. We're not very strong. We're not, compared to other animals. We're pretty crappy predators and pretty defenseless. So we're wired for that. What psychedelics have been proven to do is to decrease that amygdala activity by as much as 90%. Now, if you're a veteran coming back from, 6 or 7 combat tours, or if you're a cop, first responder, a fireman, and paramedic, something like that, and you've seen a lot of really negative patterns, and you have a pretty high alert system going on. One of the aspects that we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is hypervigilance. Like, you're just always looking for threats. You're never standing still. You're like, your eyes are constantly darting corner to corner. You're always looking for what's the next threat. Very dysfunctional way of leading your life. It's kind of living 3/4 of the way to fight or flight all the time, and it ages you prematurely. It makes you, stress hormones are catabolic. They're breaking you down, and so you're aging prematurely. So one of the things we know is that it decreases amygdala tone. It increases neuroplasticity by increasing brain-derived neurotropic factor, glial cell-derived neurotropic factor, increases sensitivity to dopamine. We don't know exactly how it does that. Something to do with the receptors, not really the dopamine production itself. It affects, there's what's called a neurocleft, where neurons don't really touch. They come really close together and they send chemicals between them. We call those neurotransmitters or neuropeptides. It affects the balance of those. So the production of those, the reabsorption of those, and the receptors of those. And it gives you a window of opportunity in which you no longer feel threatened. Your ego defenses are sort of down. You've been given this glimpse of maybe some patterns that you need to work on, and your brain is ready to your brain is ready to change. Neuroplasticity is really just your ability to form new neural connections. So I'm not a grumpy old man because I'm 56 years old. I'm a grumpy old man because I have low neuroplasticity. Okay. the metaphor I like to give is you think about it like a wagon. If I'm in a horse-drawn wagon, I'm going up and down this dirt road for 56 years. How deep do you think those ruts are that those wheels are in, right? Now, turning that wagon off of the dirt road would be a metaphor for forming a new thought or thinking about something differently. So when young kids get out of my yard. Right. When the young kids do things differently than what you do, you go, that's wrong because I do, right? And so that's what neuroplasticity does, is like, well, it fills those ruts in, and now you can turn your wagon any way you want. And you can form new thoughts. And that's what we know. Now it's also accelerating because of those brain-derived neurotropic factors, that which the chemicals that are increasing neuroplasticity are doing by increasing the number of stem cells in your brain, increasing the number of compounds that actually lead to new neuron formation and new neuronal connections. And so when you do psilocybin, you get a rush of that, and then all of those changes happen in one night in an 8-hour period. And then the effect of that gradually decays. And in the case of psilocybin, in about 30 to 60 days, there's not going to be any discernible difference in your brain. So whatever changes you've made in those 60 days will stay, like any behavioral changes you've come across, or like you've implemented on yourself, thought patterns or whatever, like all that can stay. But as far as the physiologic changes that the drug causes, that's all gone 30 to 60 days. Ayahuasca is about twice that. And then Ibogaine is about twice that. So you can get almost a year of increased neuroplasticity, decreased anxiety, decreased ego, and all of that, which gives you a pretty big window of opportunity to make changes in yourself. And that's what you can get with Ibogaine, which is why that's the one that's being most studied right now, just because it's the most durable changes, and it gives you the largest window of opportunity to do what we call integration changes afterward. So it's analyzing your behaviors, figuring out where you've been going wrong historically, reinterpreting a negative event in your life, whatever it is, whatever sort of psychological, psychosocial changes you want to make in yourself. We call that the integration period. And the integration period is just a lot longer for Ibogaine.
And so the psilocybin or the psychedelic opens up the window, but the work is done after. That's when you make the changes. It just allows you to make those changes. So the important piece is doing the work after.
Go figure. Go figure. All the change comes from the work you do. Who would have ever thunk it? And it's just like everything else, right? And what are you really doing during that period? Is everything we've been talking about this whole time. It's a lifestyle adjustment. You're changing. You're changing your day-to-day thoughts and your day-to-day behaviors, very small amounts, day by day, over a sustained period of time, and it changes your outlook in the world and how you perceive the world, how the world perceives you. Changes piecemeal, but a whole lot faster than anything else you can do. Like if you go see a psychologist, well, maybe once a month you'll get some kind of epiphany from talking to a psychologist that would make you go, oh, maybe I'm going to think about that different from now on. And like, how many would you have to stretch together to really change anything significantly? And you get the opportunity to do a lot of that really quickly with the psychedelics. Hyperbarics turns out to have very similar effects to psychedelics. You don't get that big light show, obviously. And it takes longer to build up all of those because the hyperbarics is building up day by day, right? You're doing 1 hour here, 1 hour the next day, 1 hour the next day, and you're increasing stem cells and you're increasing blood flow and you're increasing brain-derived neurotropic factor. You aren't necessarily decreasing the anxiety though, so you don't have that component in there. But it's a lot of the physiology is very similar. The lieutenant governor of Texas, Rick Perry, did a functional MRI before he did his Ibogaine treatment. And he had some age-associated neurological atrophy in his prefrontal cortex. So when you do a functional MRI, you can sort of estimate, you can estimate pretty well how much brain atrophy somebody has, right? It's a decreasing gray matter that happens over your lifetime. It happens to everybody. Like, you can't avoid that. And your brain fills your skull when you're younger, and then to whatever degree it's not filling your skull anymore is atrophy, right? And so Rick Perry did his before and after, and only 6 months apart, and he regained 27% of the atrophy he had, right? So
Really?
He still had 73%, but he regained a significant amount of his neurological atrophy. And so, when they say this woman regained speech or like that, that doesn't shock me. It really, it shocks me. It doesn't surprise me. Like, it's a shocking story. It's like, wow, that's a really impressive result. But the number of things I've seen from psychedelics is a little bit. You don't even want to talk about it. You feel kind of tricky telling people the story. It's so hard to believe. It's not within the normal realms of what we experience on a day-to-day basis. You're not used to seeing profound changes like that in anybody. But I've seen it. It's the norm. It's rare that somebody does psychedelics and goes,
and nothing happens, right? Yeah. It sounds like just an overall net positive for society. So hopefully we can make some progress on legalization of it, or the availability of it.
Yeah, all the research that was going on in the 60s with LSD was based on the effects of, the LSD was a chemical approximation of what's in the psychedelics. Because back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we thought that we were smarter than nature, and so this is how nature does it, but we're going to do a more pure scientific version of it. And that's kind of what LSD was an approximation of the DMT, which is the primary biological molecule in there, but there's all sorts of tangential things going on. LSD had very, very similar stories to it, right? There's a book on that called Change Your Mind, or How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah,
I think it's called Change Your
Pollan.
Mind. Yeah. The basic postulate is that a whole lot of the Silicon Valley genius technological expansion had LSD involved. Like, the people who were coming up with those ideas were using LSD on a semi-regular basis, and probably getting some significant neurological changes in just their ability to see different patterns and to reverse non-useful patterns and their ways of thinking. But then I want to say it was like a famous newscaster's son or nephew or something took LSD and jumped out of a hotel window or something like that, got hit by a car while on LSD or something like that. And it just public reaction,
Right.
and it became this big story and everybody got afraid of it. And, the powers that be damned it, and everything went underground with it for a really long time. And it's unfortunate, but that's the cycle of life, that's the cycle of science. And so I hope that something like that doesn't happen again with psychedelics, but that, it's always a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Well, I could sit here all day and ask you questions, but I know I got to let you go. So thanks for being here today. So one thing I want to leave listeners with is just the sleep remedy. So it's called Sleep Remedy, and where can they find that?
Yeah. So Sleep Remedy, the URL for your Sleep Remedy exists on docparsley.com.
Okay.
So either one, sleepremedy.com or docparsley.com, you can find that.
Okay. And I'll put that in the show notes. We'll send listeners to sign up for your newsletter and check out your sleep product and keep up to date on what's going on with you. So thank you for your time today.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.